Okay, we've got a lot of people asking about Shingle Springs. It says, my buddy Aaron is thinking about moving to Shingle Springs, wanted to bring him on, talk a little bit about the Shingle Springs area and why it could be a possibility if you're thinking about moving to the Sacramento metro. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. This is going to be pros and cons. So if you want one of those feel good, yada yada videos about please move in, this ain't one of them. This is going to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's get started. All right, what's up, my friend Aaron? How you doing?
I'm doing good, brother. How you doing?
Good. All right, let's drop it in. Shingle Springs. Let's talk a little location as well. If someone's moving into Sacramento and they're thinking Shingle Springs, it's a little far away, but what do you love about it?
It's exactly what you just said. It's a little far away. I mean, it's basically like geographically, it's east of El Dorado Hills. So as you head east on Highway 50, you pass some really popular areas like Folsom, California, and then next is El Dorado Hills. But then after that, you're really like you're up in the foothills, sort of, and the further up you go, the more remote it gets, and eventually you're in South Lake Tahoe. But the next neighborhoods, as you kind of work your way up, you get Cameron Park, and then you get into Shingle Springs. Now, I love that area, and I will be moving there at some point in time. I mean, really, my wife and I talk about it all day long, every day. It's really like it's a matter of when that house becomes available, because when you're living out in the country or in the foothills, it's very different from being in the suburbs. I mean, a lot of the homes were custom built. There's a lot of moving parts to everything, a lot of pros and cons. And so there's a whole lot more, in my opinion, to consider when moving up into those areas. But there's a lot of, the really great reasons to do it. But there's also a whole bunch of reasons why it's like a bad idea for people. So what do you want to jump into first?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, when I was looking to upgrade, and I made my upgrade about 8 months ago to Gold River, Cameron Park was definitely on my Cameron Park, not Shingle Springs. But what I noticed was like a lot of times online, you'd see stuff advertised as Cameron Park. You'd go up there and it was Shingle Springs or Shingle Springs. I mean, it seems to like the Cameron Park and Shingle Springs tend to kind of bleed into each other. Of course, Shingle Springs is further away, but it seems like Cameron Park is a little bit like Shingle Springs, maybe like half El Dorado Hills, half Shingle Springs, but like Cameron Park, I like Shingle Springs. I mean, I'll say some of the negatives for me, being someone who's thinking about moving into that area was like the fire insurance. Cameron Park, not as much as Shingle Springs. And the other thing too, that kind of was one of those things that we were surprised about is like there weren't a lot of sidewalks in some of the areas in as far as walking. You know what I mean? Like I guess you get a big piece of land out there and you're good, but there didn't seem to be a lot of like the sidewalks. We would run into neighborhoods that in Shingle Springs and Cameron Park that would just have no sidewalks, and I'd say like that's that's okay, but as far as walking around, it just made it a little hard. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and that's going to be more the case in Shingle Springs than it is Cameron Park. I mean, Cameron Park, we could do a whole nother show about that. I mean, it's just basically a much more suburbanized version of Shingle Springs, really. But like we said, as you work your way up Highway 50, the further east you get, the more rural it'll be. So, like in Cameron Park, the lots are generally bigger. There's some more space. But there's also like much more infrastructure and it's much more of a neighborhood versus a rural community. When you get into Shingle Springs, the majority of the properties up there, they're going to be somewhere ranging from 5 to 10 acres. Although don't get me wrong, there's plenty of properties that are like, 1 through 5 acres and even a handful that are under an acre. But a lot of the neighborhoods, a lot of the communities up there, are zoned in a way where it's always going to be 10-acre properties or more, or, something like that. And so, when you get further up the hill, you do have to be concerned about a lot of things. Like you said, fire insurance. I've had Javier Ortiz from Beach and O'Neill on before, and he's an awesome insurance agent. I call him for all my quotes. And I must drive him nuts because I haven't bought this house up the hill yet because I'm still looking. And I think I've had him do like 25 quotes for me or something like that. But what you will find, I'm like a quasi insurance expert because of that, is essentially that there's a few things. If you are not on public water, which a lot of the homes in Shingle Springs, that you're on a well, or you're on what's called El Dorado Irrigation District, which is like, a quasi like between public and being on a well, basically, if you will, in terms of risk. And then, of course, there are some that are actually on public. But if you're on a well, you're automatically in a higher risk, because think about it. You don't have a fire hydrant. How's the
Yeah.
fire department going to show up and hook up? If you are more than 1,000 feet away, in terms of the house being 1,000 feet away from a fire hydrant, you're now a higher risk. If you're more than 5 miles away from a fire department, I'm talking full service, 24/7, and the insurance company, they're gonna look into it to ensure that that's the case. If you're more than 5 miles away in terms of Google Maps driving there, not as the crow flies, from a fire department, automatic highest risk in terms of insurance. So what you'll find is, fire insurance is going to cost, $5,000 to $20,000 depending on the price range of the property and also how old the property is, because also the older the property is, the more it costs to rebuild the property, because you got to bring it up to current code, right? If it was built in
Mm-hmm.
the 50s, they didn't have the same code as now. So it's a lot more expensive to bring things to code, so they charge more on that. So fire insurance is one thing. Another thing that you're going to find is schools. Schools up there are pretty good in terms of like the ratings. If you go on to like greatschools.org or stuff like that, but you got to think about distance. If you live on 10 acres, I mean, think about it. So like the court that I live in right now, I'm on like a little shy of a quarter acre. It's like 0.2 acres. Okay. I looked on a mapping program the other night, actually, because I was kind of trying to like visualize for myself how much space something was. If you took my entire court and the court behind me and the court over there and the court over there, that was 10 acres. I mean, we're talking like 50 homes worth of like, suburban property. So, I mean, you talk about a whole community like that. Well, it's not exactly walking distance for the kids. Now, they do
Right.
have buses and all that stuff, but basically my point is that if you're going to live out in Shingle Springs, plan on having to drive your kids to school, most likely. I mean, unless they're old enough and the school bus is, available wherever you're at. But that's another consideration. Speaking of driving around, it's not going to be as convenient, if you're about to cook dinner and you're like, oh, we totally forgot the asparagus. Hey, honey, you mind running up to Rayleigh's real quick and grabbing a thing of asparagus? I mean, that could be like a 30-minute drive, round trip, or an hour, depending on how far out into Shingle Springs you are. I mean, basically, the further away you get from Highway 50, the longer it's going to take you to get to, resources, essentially.
Well,
But
yeah. Oh, go
go
for it.
ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is also one of the things I noticed about Shingle Springs and Cameron Park too, but Shingle Springs also, is the fact that you'll look on the map and you'll be like, oh, you know what? It's not that far from the freeway, but we're not talking about just straight shot roads like you get like in Folsom or like Gold River or whatnot. We're talking about like you look at the distance on the map and you're like, this much, that's fine. But they could be really windy. They could be up. They could be down. They could be like little road. I mean, it's very kind of deceptive as far as like you looking at it, you're like, oh, you know what? That's like 5 seconds to the freeway. And then you get there and it's like, well, that's a 1-lane road. Like it goes up a hill. It's very windy. So maybe on the map it looks like this, but it's really like a good 15-20 minute drive. So that's what I found to be a little kind of deceptive about like the maps. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. And not only that, you add in like inclement weather, wildlife, which, some of these things like the wildlife, that could also be in the pros. I mean, how cool is it that you got deer and all sorts of stuff running around? But flip side, if you're driving at night or early in the morning, headlights and all that stuff, you got to keep your eyes out for that. So maybe you're not driving as fast, all that stuff. So yeah, you definitely, it takes you a little bit longer to get around to various places.
Well,
I mean, honestly, even for myself and my family, when we talk about, our intentions and like, what we want to do and why we're going to move, I mean, we're probably not going to leave our property too often. I mean, I'm not talking about like homesteaders and, we don't see people for years at a time, but I mean, like right now, I go home from work every day, like in the middle of the day, I jam home to my house real quick just to go have lunch. I'm not going to do that if we live in Shingle Springs. There's various things that, you won't be able to do in terms of the logistics of getting places. But that's also, for some people at least, that checks off a box in the pros column too, being further out from things.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. One of the things that impressed me too about Shingle Springs is the fact, and this is a huge pro for me, is the idea that like I was looking at the median home price in Shingle Springs, and it's like 634,400. Like so, like I was like, that's pretty cool. Now, the thing that you have to consider, and something that Aaron hit into earlier, you're not going to see your usual like quarter acre house and everything too. A lot of these homes up there for this price point, you're also going to get a big chunk of land. So if you're someone who's a big fan of Yellowstone or Hallmark Channel movies, I mean, this is going to be almost your compound. And I've seen pretty amazing and epic compounds up in Shingle Springs that have blown me away. They have some land and everything too. Fire insurance hasn't scared them off. And it's just really kind of fun living. Like you said, like when you plan on moving up there, it's not like you're thinking to yourself, hey, we're just going to buy one house and some land and that's it. You're thinking about actually bringing in like in-laws, family, building additional units, so you have this whole like kind of like estate kind of property, correct?
Well, yeah, and that's been part of why it's taken longer to find a place, right? Because my parents live across the street from me, and I have young children, and my parents relocated and bought the house across the street from me to be near my kids, and so you make a lot of decisions in life based off of family and stuff like that, and so in terms of what we want to do is essentially either find a property that already has two houses on it,
Yep.
which they are out there. There's quite a few actually, or find a property that is already built that has sufficient space and also the right layout with the land to add another house to it. Or even I'm looking at also considering adding a manufactured home. Manufactured homes have come like the just eons in evolving into, like, there's some really great stuff that it's not like, a lot of people, they picture a manufactured home and it's like this old beat up 1980s trailer or something, and a lot of these things these days, the new ones that are built, you can barely tell the difference between that and like a track house built by Lennar or something like
Yeah.
that. So the benefit there obviously is it's way easier to throw one of those up than actually, like, build something from the ground up. But there are tons of options up there. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it. I would say that the other thing that you need to consider, and this was a consideration that my parents had in terms of like also which property makes sense or not makes sense. Like for there was one property, it already sold actually, but it was like it checked off almost all of my boxes. I mean, it had a shooting range in the backyard, man. I mean, how cool is
Wow.
that? And the only problem though is that it was a little bit far from a hospital, and so my parents are 70. And not that they go to the hospital all the time, but at a certain point, you get to a distance away from those kinds of things, and that's a concern for people in that age. And then also a concern that my mom had, to be quite honest, was the road getting into the property. Like once you got off one of the main little roads that are nice paved roads cutting through Shingle Springs, a lot of them you cut off onto like a semi-private or private gravel road or even dirt road that takes you to the neighborhood, or that's part of the neighborhood or whatever. Well, this one, it was like the crooked mile and like kind of gnarly getting in on certain spots. And so, between that freaking my mom out in the distance, that one didn't work. But there's some really cool spots. I mean, I would say in like the pros columns, if you're somebody that you want more space, but you don't want to live out in the middle of nowhere, Shingle Springs is awesome because you're part of El Dorado County. You
Right.
still are within a relatively close distance to downtown Sacramento, all that stuff. Whereas if, like, there's some areas in El Dorado County that are sweet. I would love to live in like Somerset, for instance, but it's so far away. I mean, you
Yeah.
might as well live in Montana or something at that point. So in terms of proximity to, the rest of the world and everything, Shingle Springs is still really close to everything. And you're only about 10 to 20 minutes or so, depending on how deep into the country you get, from El Dorado Hills Town Center, which I would say
Yep.
is going to be like your main mecca of all of your big shopping, big box stores, restaurants, all that kind of stuff. And if that doesn't get you done, then it's just one more exit down the 50, and then you're in Folsom, Palladio, Costco, all of
Yeah.
that. There is shopping, up in the Shingle Springs area. They have a Target, a TJ Maxx, a lot of different things like that. It's just not as abundant, of course, as, you get closer to downtown Sacramento, basically.
Well, I mean, you're going to see your like Safeways, you're going to see your stuff there, like local shopping, like, but
Sure.
your Costco's as of this point, or you mean Folsom, there's a new one that's going to be opening up in El Dorado Hills. And like you said, like for any kind of like that stuff, it's about like, we mapped it and it's about maybe 45 minutes to downtown Sacramento. So it's a nice option for someone who's looking for like Hallmark living, maybe wants a ranch, maybe wants that kind of life. And like Aaron said, you're going to see development happening already in Folsom with Folsom Ranch growing. You're going to see a whole bunch of more commercial over there on that side of the freeway. El Dorado Hills is growing as well too. I mean, you got so many new home builders and places being developed. Pretty much Cameron Park is like little El Dorado Hills at this point. So you're going to have your access. But the thing that I love also about Shingle Springs is the fact that like you're so close to Tahoe as well too. I mean, like if you're someone who loves beauty, nature, animals, all that kind of stuff, like it's one of those things where like you're getting closer to Tahoe. You still have kind of like that 20-minute maybe drive to Folsom and El Dorado to do your shopping. You kind of get your best of both worlds. I mean, for me, the only negative, like I said, well, the two are maybe the windy roads and the fire insurance, but it's I mean for like 650 around to get a nice house with some land, not bad, man, not at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I'd say 650 is, if you're buying at 650 and it's got some land, it's probably got a little bit of updating to do. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some really phenomenal estates up there that go well
Oh yeah,
past
yeah, yeah.
$2, $3, $4 million up there. I mean, what you'll find in Shingle Springs a lot more so than some of the other areas, maybe like Rescue, California would be comparable, is that there's a lot of equestrian estates, like a lot of horse
Yeah.
properties, basically. So when you're shopping for houses, a lot of times when you get into like that, I'd say like the 750 or more range in that market, a lot of them are going to have some sort of horse facility or a barn or something like that can be a pro or a con. I'm totally like, we're not horse people. I'm not against that. I don't know. My daughter's 3.5, so who knows what the world's got with that. But if there was a big barn on the property, a big outdoor structure, sweet, I would love that. So that would be a pro for me. But you got to keep in mind that you're paying for those structures
Yeah.
typically as part of your purchase price. So if you're not into horses and there's a whole bunch of investment put into horse stuff on that property, that may not be a winner for you. But
But I
Shingle
mean,
Springs is pretty sweet. That whole
but you,
area is awesome, even the surrounding towns.
But I mean, you think about it, like 750 for a house, equestrian. I mean, like that's just mind-boggling when you look at the prices like here in like Folsom, El Dorado Hills, and Gold
Oh yeah.
River. I mean, that's just like nuts. Where you're thinking all that stuff. Oh, I thought of the third pro or third con that you guys need to watch out for as well too is when you start getting up into like certain parts of El Dorado Hills, Cameron Park, not so much, but Shingle Springs definitely. You got to worry about the internet as well too. You have to just make sure that Xfinity goes out there. When you get into the rural kind of areas like that, just make sure that before you pull the trigger on the house, if you're someone like, let's say you're working at home and this is your thing, someone like Aaron, when he moves up there, is going to be doing a lot of YouTube. Like you definitely need to make sure that you have some sort of provider. We work like, we live in like a Spotify, Netflix kind of times right now. And imagine being stuck out in the middle of your nice estate, everything's going on, and the kids are saying, hey, can we get Netflix? And you're like lining up the satellite. So just make sure a little bit about the internet as well out there. You know what I mean, Aaron?
Well, yeah, and let me add one more really big negative, but there's a workaround to it. I mean, everything, you kind of sometimes you got to pay to play, I guess the saying can be.
Yep.
And so as you get into the foothills, you hear about it all the time with PG&E, the rolling blackouts,
Oh,
basically.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, you know, when you're in the foothills, that's a big concern. And so, you know, when you're buying a property, one of the things that, you know, you're going to probably want to have, and it, you know, you're going to have to pay to play, is what I said, is you're going to probably want to have solar and also like some sort of, you know, maybe a generator or something like that, to where essentially, you know, during those periods of time when they're doing blackouts or power just goes out or whatever, you're not, you know, put back into the 19th century for a week or whatever. You know, you'll actually be able to go on with life. And, you know, 5 to 10 years ago, when that first really started like happening a bunch with PG&E, it was like a really big deal. I feel like the availability of generators and all that stuff, and just, you know, those companies really just marketing and selling those products a lot has you know, kind of changed that for a lot of people that live up there. It's more of just like an added expense, but again, you know, you kind of you're gonna have to pay for that kind of lifestyle essentially. So like I said, you got to pay to play sometimes.
Well, guys, if Shingle Springs gets you going and you're thinking to yourself, man, I love that type of lifestyle, I love that living. On my team specifically, we have someone who focuses in on Cameron Park and on the Shingle Spring area. We'd love to show you some houses and everything too. Aaron knows the ins and outs of all that stuff, like as far as fire insurance and everything too, so reach out. Until next time, guys, we'll probably do Shingle Springs Part 2, to be honest, and get a little deeper into the muck. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and like I said, hopefully this gives you a little taste of what to expect if you're thinking about moving into the Shingle Springs area. Until next time, any parting words, Aaron?
Hopefully we get to see you in Shingle Springs sometime.
There we go. Guess what, guys? The video just ended. But don't worry, we have more videos just like that one right over there. And if you missed that red subscribe button during the course of the video, we got you covered right there. Hit that subscribe button. We promise to bring you some amazing content. We won't let you down. Now, if you're looking for a team in the Sacramento metro area to work with, we'd love to talk to you one-on-one. We always include a Zoom link down below, so book a time where we can talk to you a little one-on-one, find out exactly what your real estate needs are.